Bowen Gillings, welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here. I love talking with you. Looking forward to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, we got a great topic that you suggested on writing fight scenes. And I know you give workshops and talks on this very topic, which I think will be of great interest. But before we dive into all the details about that, what's new in your writing world?
Well, quite a bit. This is a busy writing month for me. We're coming up on the Springs Book Bash coming up here at the end of the month, followed immediately by the Pikes Peak Writers Conference. Then I turn around in the 1st of June. I have a new book coming out. It's a compilation of a lot of my short works, some that have been published, some that have not. And so I'm looking forward to getting that out in the world.
What's the title of the compilation?
Currently, there's a contest going on amongst my readers. The one that's leading the pack so far is called Overstuffed Lunchbox, which I really like.
Oh, I vote for that. I'm putting in my vote for that too.
Okay.
That's great. That's an excellent title. And yeah, Pikes Peak Writers, that just looks like another powerhouse group of speakers and workshops and things like that. You've just always, it's just an amazing conference with great keynotes, everything.
It is. I love it. I love how closely it and the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, the Colorado Gold Conference, both in terms of their format. I think they've found a really great sweet spot that works for writers of all levels, whether you're looking for professional type stuff or you're just getting into writing as a hobby or some way to express yourself. I love that both conferences offer that up, and I'm looking forward to this year's Pikes Peak Writers Conference. I have a writer friend coming back as a keynote too, actually, David Slayton and John Gilstrap coming. And then I'm excited also because myself and my partner in crime, AJ Metzger, we are putting on for the first time, a 3 hour long fighting and fight scenes workshop. So we're really excited about that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's get some. What we'll do today is we'll talk about writing fight scenes, and we'll just give enough away to get people excited to sign up for the conference and then sign up and make sure they're there for your workshop that
Cool.
day. So terrific. Um, I think before we dive in, it sounds like a kind of a crazy question, but should we define what a fight scene is? I was thinking,
Absolutely. Yep.
okay.
It's one of
So
the first things I do in the workshop. So people understand what we're talking about when we talk about fight scenes. Basically just call a fight scene any expression of violence your characters or the story uses to further the story or to expand or explore the character. It could be as simple as one character slapping another because the motivations behind it, the purpose it serves in the story is the same as an all-out battle between two opposing forces, whether armies or individuals, etc. It's an expression of violence you're using in your story for a specific purpose. That's how I define a fight scene.
And again, I think that's a great point. It could be a really quick thing, it could be an extended thing, it
Mhm.
could be one to one, it could be army versus army.
Absolutely. And that's what I try to express in the workshop is the same thought process and basis I'm trying to share with people works no matter what size of scope you're looking for. If you're looking for epic and grand, or if it's intimate, inside of it, it's at a kitchen table, those kind of things, it's the same process.
Right. I would put myself in the category of writer who fears writing fight scenes. It somehow just is daunting. I don't know why. Maybe it's well, I don't know. I'm sure you've encountered all the reasons why people find them uncomfortable. Maybe it's as uncomfortable as writing a sex scene,
It
um,
can
which,
be.
which can also be a fight scene, I guess.
It can be if you think about it in the first place as a scene and understanding what every scene in your story should do. If you understand that, things like further the plot, explore the characters, gain information, expand the world, those kind of concepts. If you think about it that way, then writing a fight scene or even a sex scene is not that much different than writing any other scene. You're progressing the story. by doing this. If it's not, then it's probably unnecessary, like any other scene would be unnecessary if it's not following those same functions. But I think people worry about not being an expert or not knowing enough technically in terms of what fighting is to write a fight scene, which you don't need that. It gives you a certain comfort level and an understanding of, for example, human anatomy and physiology, but you don't need that because a fight scene can be what I would call a flurry of blows type fight scene, where you don't have to get into stage direction and really piecing out exactly what's going where, etc. It can be much more general than that. And I like to give examples in books, in modern novels, of different types of fight scenes so you can understand how that works and which styles of fight scenes might best work in your own work. Because if you are writing, for example, a tense military thriller, there is an expectation by your readers through that genre that there will be a level of detail, particularly possibly in like the weapons systems used, the tactics, etc. But if you're, say, reading more of a general thriller or mystery, I like to use that genre just because there's always typically some kind of fight in it, where perhaps the characters aren't expert tacticians, or they're not expert at their weapons. You don't have to get into that kind of depth and precision. And in the workshop, I lay all that out a bit so that you understand, oh, for what I'm writing, a romance where perhaps there's a tiff between a couple of people, I don't have to understand the choreography of how your hand moves from here to here, how your leg moves from there to there, or whatever. It can be much more general and still be effective. Because again, if you think of it as a scene specifically, and just keep that in mind, that's what you need to focus on. What is the scene doing for your story?
Right. No, where does it begin? Where does it end? How does this
Mhm.
progress the larger arc of the story you're trying to tell?
Yes.
Um, what I assume you probably have a list of things to do and things to musts to avoid in terms of things you don't do. How do you coach writers to get uh,
Yep.
their abilities up to be able to tackle this very challenging type
Well,
of.
it comes down to six things as a writer you need to know. And I break that down as my six Ks of understanding in terms of writing the scene. Instead of going into specifics, what I can let everybody know is it starts with understanding yourself as a writer, your voice, how your voice comes across in your writing. It also involves understanding the genre you're writing in. That has to do with tropes and expectations of your readers. Um, and then also understanding the tone of the story. A fight scene in something written by Terry Pratchett or Douglas Adams or even Janet Ivanovich, which are much more light-hearted in overall tone, are not going to have the bloody, visceral feel of, say, a Michael Crichton book, because he has this thing about always disemboweling people. I don't know why. Or anything else again that might be specific. I use military thrillers just because it's an easy concept for most people to get their head around. Okay, military, that means I'm going to have to understand weapon systems and tactics and et cetera. And we're talking big battles versus if I'm in something a little bit quieter, but I just happen to have this moment, like I said, at a kitchen table. An example I will use with audiences or members of the workshops would be it's a grandma confronting a grandchild who's living with her, and she just found drug paraphernalia in the kid's room or whatever. Not only paraphernalia, but knows that the kid's been selling. So that leads into understanding the most important parts, which is understanding the characters themselves and how they're reacting and what they would do, and then what certain actions would fit that character. Like in this example, a grandma and grandchild at a table. The grandma is not going to whip out some kung fu or, pull out a knife. This is not what the expression of violence is going to be, because that character still loves the other character. So it's those kind of understandings. I don't necessarily want a writer to create a checklist of must do, must not do. It comes to a level of knowledge and understanding about yourself as a writer and what it is you're creating and the characters in that world.
Yeah, nice, nice. Yeah, it's got to be in the flow, is what I hear you say. You can't
Mhm.
get to a fight scene and suddenly change the way you're you're
Yep.
writing. Your writing has to be in the flow of all your other
Yep.
dialogue, your scene setting, everything. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. It has to be a fight written by you, the author, in the story you're writing. So very often in first drafts, typically, like if you've done a critique of a fellow writer's first draft or first go at it, sometimes if they're not used to writing a fight scene, or like you said, there's somebody who's uncomfortable with it, the fight scene reads like it came from a different story because it reads as story, 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 action takes place here, story, story, story. you know,
right.
and that just comes with, like you said, Mark, keeping in the flow, letting that fight scene do its work as a scene in the story, just like every other scene you've included, and then that all that will work as it comes from you keeping in your voice as an author, your knowledge and understanding and love of your characters and the world they're in, etc.
Yeah. Do you, I mean, I've seen, I think, workshops, and maybe it's one that I saw you give at some point, sort of almost acting out a
Yes.
fight scene. And okay, good.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I do that in the workshops because I want people to understand if you are going to write a little bit more detail into your fight scene, you're going to put some choreography in there. You're going to do a little dance between two characters. You have to understand how the body moves, what each character or each opposing force side, etc., is seeing, so that when you are writing this, okay, by having them throw a simple punch with their left hand, define it however you want, a jab, a hook, whatever. They're punching with their left hand. What does that do to them in terms of what is exposed? How does it move their body, etc.? What is the opposing side seeing? Now, it also there this comes down to a knowledge of the characters. Will the characters notice anything because they're not experienced in combat? You have two young kids just tussling for the first time, so that might not be as important. But if you're trying to write Jason Bourne type characters that are extremely familiar with action and whose job or whose character background or character métier is to have that kind of awareness, then you, the writer, also needs to have an understanding because your character will have that understanding, and you can't express that if you don't understand it yourself.
Yeah.
That's why I like to do the role playing. I like to have we do a little thing in our workshop where we let the attendees kind of manipulate us like maquettes. And like, all right, we're gonna do a four encounter fight scene. It's gonna like punch, be punch, counter, whatever. And there's like basically four steps to the fight scene, something simple that they can get broken down in about 10 minutes and then write about it. So they position us, then I have them look and see after move one, what's available for move two, who's got what, where's their weight, all this other stuff. And that's a lot of fun for us, AJ and I, because we get to be played around with like puppets. But it's also cool to see then what the writers come up with based on we're all seeing the same thing, we're all participating in the same thing, but everybody then writes something a little bit different, and that's a lot of fun to see.
Yeah. Are there any writers you look up to in terms of this that you think are just the gold standard?
I do, and it's across various boards and various genres. So one of the ones I love because of how she infuses her character's voice into the fights. So in other words, it's she writes in the first person, and so you're hearing what's going on in that character's head during the fight, and it's the same snarky attitude that she has throughout the rest of the story, and that's Janet Ivanovich. Janet Ivanovich's stories are so fun to read. Her Stephanie Plum series. Stephanie is just such a fun character to engage with and being in her mind. So in her mind, she can be scared, she can be worried, she can not understand what's going on, but the character never displays it outwardly because that's who she is. She is brazen and brash, and but inside she's like, oh crap, this stuff's happening. Another one that's really good if you want the details, the nitty-gritty details of a fight, of the choreography would be anything by Jonathan Mayberry. His Joe Ledger series is really, really good at that, especially the hand-to-hand type combat stuff. He does that very, very well. And that, Jonathan has this background as a bodyguard and a martial arts expert, and he's done all this stuff. So that plays into how he does his fight scenes because he knows the details, he writes the details, and it fits for his genre and his character. Now, somebody who does it cool in more of a broad tactical aspect, like let's see the big scene and see how everybody gets through it in a much more kind of military approach or tactical operator approach would be John Gilstrap, who's been at Rocky Mountain, at Colorado Gold, and he's coming back to Pikes Peak. He does it great. Um, One of the ones I love for the reactions that the characters give and the ability to put the reader into the same confused, oh my gosh, I can't tell what's going on state of combat is Joe Abercrombie. He's a fantasy writer. He's known a lot as Lord Grimdark. He kind of is the main figure in the grimdark type fantasy where you're kind of gritty and nobody's really telling the truth. Everybody's got kind of a little angle or has some darkness in them. But his fight scenes are full of just keeping the reader on their toes because things are coming at you left and right and left and right. And that's those guys, all those names, I highly recommend to if you're somebody who wants to see different flavors across the board. Those are all great. And they're all different genres.
Yeah.
Um, so I like all
Yeah.
those guys.
How about Lee Child? You haven't read any Reacher?
Yep.
Because
Well, Reacher's known for it. I think he does a very good job. But what I look like about the Reacher books is Reacher is almost anti or a-emotional when it comes to it. It's just about getting it done. So there's not a lot of internal processing. So
yeah.
yeah, if you want just the starkness of it, that's good. I would say Jonathan Mayberry is that similar type of thing where the character doesn't really input a lot of emotional or mental processing in the midst of combat because those characters tend to be like Reacher, somebody who's so used to combat and are fighting in a way where they want to get that battle over with as quickly as possible, and then they'll process it later. So that's a different thing than like Stephanie Plum, who, especially in the beginning, is not used to the violence. And so she's processing through it while it's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really a great observation just in terms of, how aware are your characters of, like for Reacher, he's done this book after book after book, story after story. He's going to
Mhm.
go into a fight, and whether he's going up to a house in the dark with, that's stocked with machine guns and 10 guys, he's going to take the whole thing down, and he knows what he's doing. He's got tons of experience. And like you say, he's very flat emotionally about this. It's just get the job done. But the
Yep.
whole idea of layering in how you're processing the fight in the middle of the fight and knowing, is this completely out of character for you to swing a punch at somebody?
Right.
Is this something that the second you're in the middle of it, you really changed who you are, or you are already regretting the fact that you let your emotions get away from you and you couldn't control them. And
Yeah.
I've seen some good fight scenes too, where you can almost pause mid-fight and just go into this whole other kind of internal thought, depending on if you're
Yep.
first person, third person, how you might approach it.
Yeah. So that's he doesn't do all the time, but in one of his books, Joe Abercrombie, it's a duel between two characters, and it takes place over multiple chapters because you have that introspection because of the character processing this as it's happening, and it works because of who that character is, and also he's juxtaposing that duel with action that's happening in other parts of the story, so he's intercutting the duel, which is only taking moments, with action that's happening elsewhere and juxtaposing it so that the reader is, oh, what's happening next? And is reading through this section at the same time, wondering what's going on, back here with that character who's in the duel. So it can be really well played. Um, in terms of, but that's an understanding of the character. If it was a Reacher type character, doing that introspection mid-fight doesn't make as much sense because Reacher is a guy who's not going to process it until it's done.
Right.
He's
Sure.
there to get something done. He's known and he's in the moment so that he can. If he's not in the moment, he knows he's gonna die. That's what Reacher is. So if I'm not in the moment and I'm not focused 100% all of me on this, I could die. Somebody else I care about could die. So the introspection and reflection, if you were to do that in the writing, wouldn't fit a Reacher. So that really comes with again knowing who the character is.
Right, right. What I'm putting you on the spot here. What's your favorite fight scene you've written?
Favorite fight scene I've written. So I can't necessarily put one down as a favorite because I have one where the fight is kind of a fake to mess with the character. So it's a character observing a fight. I loved writing it, but the intent is to kind of fake the character out and try to convince him what's happening. But probably the opening chapters of Exceptionals, my novel, was one of my favorite to write because it's so absurd. It takes place in a basement bar between four armed clowns, if you will. People are in clown outfits. They're trying to kidnap this girl. And so it's a fight scene not only between a protagonist and antagonist, but that protagonist at the same time is defending an innocent, is defending this young woman who they're trying to kidnap. But it's just the absurdity and buffoonery of these people dressed as clowns having a fist fight that turns into almost into a gunfight until the rest of the bar patrons kind of get involved and stop things. So that was a lot of fun to write because it had, a lot of onomatopoeias of the sounds of his uh, clown shoes going off in the middle of the battle. The fact that an exit door will not open for him because it's rusted shut. It's all sorts of little things. It starts in a bathroom and rolls around and moves to different places. There's a guy who's too much of an obstacle for him to handle alone, but somebody else comes in and helps him out. So it was a lot of fun. And it's not a heavily choreographed fight in terms of specific martial actions. It's just one thing is hitting you after another is hitting the character, and he has to react to it. And that one's in the first person, which makes the reader right there experiencing it along with the character
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
experience it, like instead of observing it with the character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many drafts did it take you to nail it?
A lot, dozens probably at least. I am a heavy. I have a revision problem. I do some heavy editing, and then that scene started as a short story, and so it was taking that short story and expanding it so that we had other information that we need. So there was that process. And that was also making sure that the fight made sense. So having some of the beta readers and stuff come back and go, I couldn't figure out who was this and who was that. So doing that, then understanding a little bit of the sensitivity of the venue. I put it in, I said it, the story takes place in the mid 1980s, and this scene is in a lesbian bar back when that was something that wasn't really public. They don't advertise necessarily publicly. So how to address it, how the women in that bar would talk to each other, et cetera. And had an actual a fellow author who is she is a lesbian. She writes lesbian fiction, and had her kind of give it, if you would, a sensitivity read, for lack of a better phrase. And she was like, I would just change the name of the bar to this, other than it was fine. Like, okay. But yeah, so it went through many iterations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not one who gets it right the first time or even the fifth time out. It's more like the 27th time.
One thing that occurs to me is in writing a fight scene, whether it's first person or close third,
Mhm.
when fight, of course, is meant to inflict pain, and to describe that pain in a way, and it's, of course, it's no different than trying to do anything else, whether it's writing about a drive down a country road or some tense moment that isn't a fight, but is to
Mhm.
come up with some way to describe the pain that isn't cliche, you know,
Correct.
and that really, you know, there seems like there's a limited vocabulary, but of course there's not in terms of, you know, really trying to put the reader in the shoes of somebody feeling that kind of pain.
Right. No,
Yeah.
and the simplest way to avoid cliche is to keep it simple, is to use simple English and simple language in the fight scene, and that way you don't stray into the cliche. You're just expressing a truthful experience in the moment for your character. Um, that said, if you are writing something though that is filled with weird metaphor and things like that, I look to a Terry Pratchett or a Douglas Adams kind of thing where there's always really offbeat comparisons and metaphors thrown in, etc. Then it's same thing. In the middle of this, how do I say something that is catchy and funny, but yeah, you said is not cliche, and that takes a little bit more work and a little bit of outside the box thinking. But if you're something like that, like Terry Pratchett or Douglas Adams, you are doing fantasy or science fiction, so you're in a world you've created, so you have a lot of room to play to do that. But in general, my general rule is that the simpler you can keep those descriptions, like the what is the sensation of a bone breaking, or the sound of it, um, then that is going to be more easily transposed or accepted by the reader, and they can identify with it. And just like everything else, it's a show don't tell. So more that you can show the character's reaction to that pain, the character dealing with that pain, the internalizing or envisioning of the pain by the reader is something they create. It's not
Yeah.
you trying to force an experience on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So if the character has to limp and wince and do all these things after getting a damage to the leg, you don't have to describe what the pain was like specifically, other than was it a sharp pain, a hard pain, searing, is it prolonging? Those kind of words that are simple but convey directly what's going on.
Yeah. One of the things I love about a good fight scene on a movie or a television show or reading a book is what I would call creative weaponry, where you don't go into a fight with a gun or a knife. The fight happens because it happens impromptu, and your protagonist or antagonist looks around for something to use that's a creative
Mhm.
weapon that may not be like a weapon, but just something that can inflict some damage. Do you get into that at all, or have,
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a kid who grew up loving Jackie Chan movies,
yeah,
and his movies are masterpieces of that. Just taking everybody out, having a fight with three guys using a ladder or whatever. And then yeah, so understanding the setting the fighting is taking place in is extremely important, especially if you as a writer point something out. It's the old Hitchcock rule: if you show the gun, you got to use the gun. Yeah,
Chekhov, I believe Chekhov,
or
but
yeah, Chekhov's gun. Sorry.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But yeah, it's that kind of concept. So if you're going to describe something, the room or the space that this combat's taking in, and there's something possibly that can be used for a weapon or shelter or obfuscation or something, a distraction, and your character needs it but never uses it, you better be able to show us why. Otherwise, just take that thing out of there.
yeah,
But understanding that setting, and then the trick also that a lot of writers forget about is both sides get to use the setting. All right. You can't set up the room and then only one side takes advantage of it unless
right,
that's how you set it up. The other side is totally unaware, is first time in, doesn't observe, might was however you want to set that up. One side is much more tactically wise or than the other one. There's all that. But if you have placed a fight in a certain setting and one side totally ignores that setting in terms of, like you said, improvised weapons or places to get away, etc. Uh, there has to be a reason why. Otherwise, you need to take a lot of that out because your readers could be reading that scene thinking, "Why didn't he use the sword that you told me was hanging on the wall?" Whatever.
yeah, 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 yeah. Great. Do you find yourself watching a movie or watching a TV show, and obviously when you're reading, I'm sure you're very conscious because you've taught this issue so much. You're very conscious, you're a very observant consumer of these moments.
Mhm.
Uh, do you watch them differently when you watch a movie and there's a good fight scene? Are you
Um,
hoping to see something that's gonna, just like, wow, this is so different?
I don't necessarily want to see different. I want to see that it works for the character and the story. Um, I think it's very funny sometimes, and this was big back in like 80s and 90s action movies, where they would use your main character knows martial arts of some kind, and that martial art is an end all be all to all fight situations, no matter what would show up. So your karate guy would beat everybody with karate, or okay, it's a karate guy, but his job is being a cop, where karate might not necessarily make so much sense because you're going to get in a whole lot of trouble if you kick a guy in the face or whatever. So I like to see fight scenes that totally fit the characters, the setting, the story itself, the tone the story set in. That's what I'm looking for. Um, and now I get more into is the style of fight that's being used what that character actually would use if they were in that situation or had the background that you've shown us. Uh, Again, a good example is a lot of your more sport type martial arts. I don't think you should have in like a Jason Bourne or a James Bond. It doesn't make sense. It's not how they would fight because they're not fighting for points or they're not trying to endure. They're trying to get everything done as fast as possible and move on. The Jack Reacher example too. Yeah, so if Jack Reacher were to start doing a lot of twirly spinny kicks, that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah,
Could he
yeah,
possibly know it? Yes, but it wouldn't make sense for who he is or what he's trying to accomplish.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so you have to match that kind of style to the character. I do an example in the workshop where I show this huge bodybuilder. He's a man named Martin Ford, and it's like you wouldn't see him doing Tai Chi in a movie. It's not fitting unless there's a comedic element to it, possibly. Just like you wouldn't see a little action guy like Jet Li, who's physically diminutive. You're not going to see him try and wrestle big guys. He's not going to try to outmuscle people. He's not going to fight the way Reacher fights. So
right.
it's seeing that. Does the fighting fit the story? I like to see that.
That's great. That's great. Wow. Um, seems like a pretty good rundown of just some great ideas and get people thinking about how they approach writing a fight scene. That's excellent. Yeah. Do you know when during Pikes Peak Writers your workshop is going to be?
Yeah, the workshop is from 9 to noon on Sunday, which I think is the 4th of May. I might be wrong, but it's
Right.
that Sunday. And what Pikes Peak is actually doing this year that they haven't done before is they're offering single day registrations. So if people don't think they can afford or give them all that time to do a full 3 day conference, you can just buy day by day. You can say, well, I can only make it Sunday to Bowen's workshop. Well, great. Then there's a way to sign up online on the conference.pikespeakwriters.org,
Yeah.
I think, website, and you can just pick a day. And the whole schedule is publicly available, so you can see if you want Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. But yeah, it's a new option they're trying out this year, and I'm excited about it because I think for some folks, especially if you're new, or you're just busy, a full conference can
Right.
be a daunting proposition.
And yeah, money wise too.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sunday is only like 110, which
Yeah.
is less than I think it's less than it's not, I think it's like a quarter of the price of the whole conference.
Yeah.
Um, but it's great, yeah. And if you come Sunday, you can come to my workshop.
There you go. That's great.
And
Well,
AJ does some great stuff. She gives a lot of background on cultures and what's accurate culturally and historically in terms of fighting styles, tools, weapons, things like that. So she's a great wealth of knowledge, and I'm happy to partner with her.
fantastic. Well, Bowen, we always like to wrap up with a book or a writer recommendation just to pass it along. And I know I didn't forewarn you this time, but maybe you can just tell us about something you're reading or something you read recently that you think more folks should be picking up.
The probably one I read recently that I love is it's by Rachel Housel Hall, and I would recommend anything she writes. Kind of urban mystery thrillers. It's typically set in LA, and she has this great voice to how she writes that is different than anything else I've really read, and I love her work. But I'll actually tell you a nonfiction book I'm working through, and I would recommend it for all writers even though it's not a book about writing, and that's called ADHD is Awesome. We're reading through this because our daughter has just been assessed for a level of ADHD. And the more I read, the more I think my own brain is working this way. And more creatives, I mean, there's so many creatives throughout history who they're almost positive have had ADHD, and it's not really a disorder. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I've often looked at it almost as a superpower. And but reading through it, it really helps me understand how my brain is working when I'm being creative or when I'm not. What it gives me another tool to deal with writer's block. It gives me another tool to deal with that stop and start we talked about, like how many times it takes you to go through a scene, because your mind is always processing the what ifs kind of questions or has been distracted by something else, and all of a sudden you bring it back in. So even if you don't know or think you have ADHD, understand reading that book. It's fun. It's a really fast read. That book gives you great insight into how the creative brain works. And I'm really enjoying that book. And I'm kind of in the middle of it right now.
Great. Terrific. Bowen, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Good luck with the workshop. Good luck with the um, release of Overstuffed Lunchbox, which is going to be the title. I'm just kidding. But good luck with all your projects. And thanks a million for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I always like talking to you. Anytime.